Okay. Good afternoon. Bonjour. As you know, this morning, CUPE made the choice to go on strike. This decision to have a major impact on New Brunswick. It will have a major impact on our province. All schools across the province are having an operational day, which means parents had to scramble this morning to find alternative childcare arrangements at the last minute. And I know it was extremely disappointing for children who are excited and ready to celebrate Halloween this school day. This is a stressful situation for families, and I recognize the disruptive impact this is having on parents. Ferry services are also affected today, creating longer commute times for people traveling for work and appointments. Correctional facilities are also affected, as well as services throughout that are normally provided by social workers. This may impact non-urgent services, such as supervised visits, but I want to assure you that the public and that any child or adult at risk will indeed be protected. My thoughts are with all New Brunswickers who are feeling these impacts today. This is an incredibly difficult situation, and I sympathize with everyone who has had their lives disrupted. We may see more impacts across other sectors in the coming days. These disruptions to New Brunswickers are completely unnecessary.
There may be repercussions in other sectors over the following days. These disruptions to New Brunswickers are completely unnecessary.
This week, a fair offer was on the table, an offer even higher than had been recently accepted by other bargaining groups. This is not realistic, and responding to these demands would put the future of all New Brunswickers at risk. We now have an offer that reflects what is available to the other unions that have already accepted. CUPE's actions show that their primary concern is to cause disruption. They have not shown an interest in engaging in meaningful negotiations. While we've seen positive signs that our province is beginning to recover from the pandemic, COVID-19 is still impacting us. This is not a time to deprive New Brunswickers of essential services. Il y a des lignes positives qui montrent que
there are positive signs that our province is beginning to recover from the pandemic, but COVID-19 is still impacting us. And this is not the time to deprive New Brunswickers of essential services.
Contingency plans have been implemented in impacted areas to protect the health and safety of New Brunswickers, but services will still be affected by this strike activity. The Department of Health, regional health authorities, and Extramural Ambulance New Brunswick have established contingency plans in the event labor disruptions target healthcare services, especially new services established to manage the pandemic. Strike action targeting COVID-19 services would result in significant reduction in health systems' capacity to provide for key services such as PCR testing, vaccinations, laboratory services, and screening services at hospitals. This kind of disruption would severely impact our ongoing response to the pandemic. If strike action does affect COVID-19 services, our health partners will work closely with public health to keep our highest risk population safe. Si la grève n'est pas des répercussions.
If strike action does not affect COVID-19 services, our health partners will work closely with public health to keep our highest risk populations safe.
Understand that contingencies alone will not alleviate the concerns. We have gone through these negotiations with a mediator, but we are at an impasse. I feel the membership are not fully aware of the extent of the offer that is on the table. If the union refuses to work with us to reach a reasonable agreement for both sides, we will take the action necessary. We are looking at options, including legislation, if that is what it takes to keep New Brunswickers safe and healthy, with access to essential services, particularly during a pandemic. I hope, however, this will not be necessary. and that CUPE will recognize the impact their actions are having on New Brunswickers. There is still an opportunity to have further discussion and to make sure that clarity on both sides is understood, that the membership appreciate that we are moving the casual rates from 80 to 100%, that the membership appreciate that while many of the educational assistants do not have a pension, in fact, none of them, we are willing to provide them with a pension plan, but at the same time, address the non-sustainability in other pensions that currently exist with CUPE that are underfunded and need to be corrected, as so many have over the past number of years. We are willing and open to demonstrating our commitment to these employees by providing fair wage increases. We also must recognize the extent that this impact has on taxpayers. We also must recognize what the future looks like beyond just this year. And yes, while it would be easy, as Mr. Dross has said, for me to solve this or immediately, yes, I could solve it for my time at this point in time this fall, but then what about next year and the year after and the year after? We're talking about not only the 20,000+ employees in CUPE, but we're talking about 45,000+ employees in government overall. So a decision here reflects many, and it's important that we're consistent. It's important that we have a package here that reflects competitiveness with other sectors, with the private sector. We've often, heard the issues about how private sector and public sector need to be aligned, so we're not taken from each other, but we're growing together. So I'm willing at any point in time to put the entire package on the table to ensure that we reflect not only the hourly rates, but we reflect the pensions that are involved. We reflect the sick time and benefits that are involved. And we reflect the vacation that's involved. So everything is on the table, and the public and the taxpayers can clearly understand that it's pretty good working for government. And it has been, and it continues to be. And so my point is, let's make it realistic for those that are paying the bills. And it's every taxpayer in this province. And let's be realistic about our demands, our work life in terms of delivering service, and that we're fair to all. And that's what this is about. That's why, yes, it would be easier for me to do something else, but it won't be to the best interests of the citizens of this province. Thank you.
Hello everyone, bonjour à tous. So I'd like to start off today by thanking the teachers and families and most importantly the students for their cooperation as we go through yet another difficult challenge facing our province and our education system in light of the CUPE strike action that began today. So I know that for many folks the rapid move to having an operational day across the school system today was disruptive and a surprise. I certainly do regret that. Permettez-moi de commencer.
I want to start by thanking teachers, families, and especially students for their cooperation and patience during this very difficult time. I know that the transitioning to a operational day has disrupted many lives.
Unfortunate, to say the least, that we only had a few hours of notice that buses would not be running this morning across New Brunswick, and no formal notice from CUPE that other staff, such as custodians and educational assistants, would be taking strike action today. This is a very stressful situation, and I know it only compounds the anxieties and stresses that living through the last 20+ months of the COVID-19 pandemic have inflicted on everyone. We are ready, however, because of our experience of managing COVID-19, with an education system that has become more flexible and more able to adapt to crises that pop up on a day-to-day basis, such as the one we're dealing with today.
The only positive aspect of the pandemic is that it showed that our education system is flexible and adaptable, and that we can deploy quickly home learning.
Quickly, to allow online learning, starting in our province's schools on Monday. But I cannot pass this opportunity to express my disappointment that CUPE's leadership would choose to further disrupt the education of New Brunswick's students at a time of global crisis, at a time of pandemic, when our healthcare workers, who should be out there worrying about the sick people in our province every day, are instead now having to worry about how they're going to look after their children because of a strike that was chosen to start today by CUPE. I fully support collective bargaining, but unions have a choice in the way that they manage these processes. And they made a choice this morning, and I don't think it's a choice that's defensible for our school system or for our province. So today, we had to ask our students to stay home, but some staff and all of our teachers reported for work, and now we're ready to move to the next step to deal with this strike and to move to home learning. Students need the stability and routine that a regular schedule can provide. We know that's important for their overall well-being. We know that the impacts on mental health of having disruptions to school are significant, and we've done our best throughout COVID-19 to minimize those. So we're going to use those same tools that we've built over the last 20 or so months to help the teachers work to maintain focus for our students and to help them on their learning journey. So given all of this, schools across New Brunswick will move to online learning starting on Monday. Online learning will continue in all of our province's schools until this strike is over. I'll
say that in French as well. That's why, given the generalized strike, the widespread strike in the province, all schools in the province will go to home learning as of Monday and will continue until the end of the strike. Clearly, during a strike, access to the schools will be limited, and so we're asking families to get the essential items that were left at school as quickly as possible.
Access to a facility that's being affected by a strike, including our schools, is going to be limited. So we'll be working with the system and asking parents to make arrangements to collect any objects that students may have left at school so that we can, as quickly as possible, return to a normal schedule, even though it is normal and online. Early learning is going to be affected by this strike as well. We have a number of early childhood education centers located in schools across New Brunswick. Those folks have been standing up for New Brunswick since the very beginning of this pandemic, and we want to do our absolute best to make sure that those operations can continue and that the lives of parents are not further disrupted. So we're going to be working with our operators to do our best to make sure that we can, where they are operating inside a public school facility, that their operations can continue safely and in line with all the necessary rules and regulations. So in the meantime, we're working to keep families as informed and up to date as possible. This morning I talked about updates over the weekend if individual schools were affected. We now know that the whole province is affected, and we are again moving to online on Monday for the whole system until the strike is over. So continue to check on your emails, school district websites, social media pages to get the most accurate and up-to-date information. Alors nous nous engageons de...
So we will keep families as informed and as up-to-date as possible. Please continue to check your email, school district website, and social media pages for the most up-to-date information.
From our students and our staff, including hardworking CUPE members, back into our schools once this strike is finished, so we can resume our focus on achieving the best possible education outcomes for all of our province's students. And so with that, thank you and wish you a happy Halloween, unfortunately one that won't be celebrated in our schools across the province today. Merci, je souhaite à tous un Halloween heureux et sécuritaire. Merci bien.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Premier. Merci. We'll now proceed with questions from the media. Nous allons maintenant procéder aux questions des journalistes. Each reporter will have one question and one follow-up, and you are invited to ask your question in the official language of your choice. Chaque journaliste aura une question et un suivi, et vous êtes invité à poser vos questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. That said, avec ça dit, Pascal Rechnog, Radio-Canada.
Pascal Rechnog, Radio-Canada. Hello. My question is for the Premier. I'd like to know if he could tell us exactly when measures could be adopted to force these striking workers to go back to work? Would this be through the emergency order or through a special law? What are the plans?
The options in that regard, which obviously I'm hopeful that it won't be required, would be depending on, I guess, a couple conditions. If the healthcare system is impacted, or if the health and safety of our citizens are at risk or jeopardized in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of an emergency order, then we could have an action directly as a result of being in a position of an emergency order in the province. And that would necessitate an end to the strike in those categories. If, on the other hand, it's assessed that this is obviously creating an undue hardship on New Brunswickers, but not necessarily a hardship related to health and welfare, then the proceedings that would happen on the legislative side would be when the House is back in session and focusing on legislative amendments that would basically put forward a wage bill as such, and or it could be back to work legislation. I mean, those are options that are available. But I'd like to reemphasize that could happen, and it can start this week. We could call certainly an emergency session of the legislature back, but we're back next week in any case. I reiterate that is not a preferred direction. We have offered a fair package to the employees. We've offered a fair package that recognizes some of the shortfalls. When I talk about the 80 to 100% in casual, the shortfalls in a pension that is unsustainable, and the shortfalls in a pension that doesn't even exist that we want to provide for educational assistance, as well as a package that reflects what the current situation is right now, as I said earlier, in this year, but reflects where we look like we'll be going forward, and we'll monitor how the province recovers over the next 2, 3, 4 years. So it's a balanced package. It's fair that all of the membership should understand, because quite frankly, it's very surprising that we're in this situation at this time.
Ma question suivie, c'est pour le premier.
My follow-up question to the Premier as well. If there is a measure to force unionized workers to return to work, would this be only for health workers, or would this be for all the striking employees?
So I think at this point, with the measures that we're able to put in place, particularly as the Minister of Education has just gone through what we'll do with online learning, we will look case by case as what's required in order to maintain safe conditions for the citizens of this province. So I don't think that I want to throw any sort of blanket coverage on this. I would rather say we'll work case by case, and we'll address it as required, as needed, to ensure that as a province we can continue to manage and we can continue to offer the services that we must.
Thank you, Premier. Travis Fortnum, Global.
Hi there. My first question is for Minister Carty. Minister Carty, at the beginning of your address there, you mentioned that CUPE made the choice to strike this morning, but it was also alluded to, and Stephen Dross tells me that CUPE gave your department notice last night. So could you clarify when word got to your department about this strike? And if it was last night, why were parents and students only notified this morning?
There was a message received at, I believe it was 12:34, relayed back into the system about the possibility of a school bus strike. No mention of educational assistants or janitors at all. So Mr. Drost might want to check his time records. Thanks.
Travis, do you have a follow-up?
I do. Sorry. So further to that, having students learn from home online, is this a direct result of not having access to transportation to schools, or is this? I'm wondering if you could clarify that.
Sure. So we had hoped that we'd be able to, in the face of just a school bus strike, that we would have been able to make modifications there, and as much as it's difficult to continue with in-person learning. When we received no formal notification of a walkout by people who are essential for the well-being of our province's children, in the form of the education assistants and the janitors who keep our schools clean in a time of a pandemic, when some of those folks didn't turn up for work without us being notified in the usual way, we really were not left with any choice but to say that we have to make a decision based on the best interests of the children and of the rest of the staff to make sure that our schools could be kept safe and our education system and the people who work in it be kept safe. So having an unknown number of people not turning up for work, no one can run an operation or any sort of business that way, or any government department. So that left us with no choice but to make the decision that we did, because if CUPE is going to choose to not share that information, which is their choice, it's not illegal, but it is certainly quite normal. And I've sat on the labor side in negotiations before and know that often when these sorts of things are decided, that information is shared in advance. And in the middle of a pandemic, to make the decision not to let us know the day before, so that the teachers, so the parents, so the students wouldn't have faced the uncertainty and anxiety that they faced this morning, in addition to the anxiety that all of us continue to face as we go through COVID-19. The healthcare workers who were left scrambling this morning as they had to make decisions about whether to turn up for their shift to look after sick people in this province, that's on CUPE.
Thanks.
Thank you, Minister. Richard Sina, CPAC. Alexandre Boudreau, L'Acte Nouvelle.
Oui, bonjour, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Yes, can you hear me? Yes. So my question is for the Premier. Some opposition leaders said that they thought about leaving the COVID-19 committee if you use the state of emergency to stop this strike. So what do you think about this, and how will it influence your decision?
Well, I would anticipate that during a pandemic that we're in right now, which is the reason we have an emergency measures act at this stage, it wouldn't be the right time for those that are part of helping to make decisions in the best interest of all New Brunswickers decide, well, it's getting a little hot, so I guess we'll vacate. I guess it would say a lot about the individual leaders, but I would anticipate that they will stay and be part of the discussion. That would be the noble thing to do. I'm as I said earlier, the situation that would require that would be one where the health and safety of our citizens are impacted by this situation, and the very reason that we have an emergency order is for the health and safety of citizens as related to the pandemic. And that's what makes a strike at this point in time even more, I guess, confusing, is that we would put citizens through this at this stage. And I guess maybe the thought process was that I would forget about the future and just concentrate on right now. And you know, what we've done throughout this is try to manage the province in a way that we come out of this stronger and better. And although we're in this fourth wave, we're coming out of that too. And we're going to do this in a way that next year we have a province that's getting brighter, and the year after, and the year after. And I need everyone to be part of that. And so it's important that we all stick together to make decisions on the best interests of the people of this province.
Merci.
Thank you. So you mentioned earlier in the possible bills, you mentioned a wage bill. So would there be a wage increase if you went to adopt a wage bill, or would it be the status quo?
So I think I mentioned that, but we've already settled with other unions. So and that wage package is defined, and that is the wage package that's on the table for the CUPE as well. So I guess my point, if it becomes necessary, we would be looking at the same wage package that other unions have already accepted.
Thank you, Premier. Vicky Hogar, CHCO TV.
Thank you. Minister Carty, how concerned are you about the number of days students have spent doing at-home online learning since the pandemic began?
I'm concerned about any day when our students aren't learning face-to-face in classrooms. We talk about the public school system because it's a system based on schools, based on the ability for students to sit with a teacher, to learn how to be good citizens, to learn how to act with each other. All those basic elements of learning how to be a good human being are part of being in class. So this is a poor substitute for that, but one that I'm relieved that we have available so that at least we're not, after having lost the days of instruction that we did as a province, which we've been fortunate so far in not having as many as a lot of other places in the country and around the world. But the fact that we're now adding to that because of a choice being made by a small number of people, I think is deeply, deeply unfortunate and is going to add to the challenges we will face with our education system and with children who have struggled throughout this. Because it's not going to be the kids of CUPE leadership who earn good salaries who suffer the most. It's going to be the kids who are living in vulnerable circumstances, kids living in poverty, kids who don't have supports at home, kids who rely on their EA to be able to help them get through the day. Those are the kids who are being hurt right now. And that, again, is a choice because there's an offer on the table. It's an offer that offers pensions to people who've never had pensions before. We usually are arguing about what type of pensions that we have and how rich they should be. We're sitting here talking about people getting a pension for the first time. So I hope CUPE comes back to the table and looks at our offer and says this is the right thing, not just for their members, but for the kids in New Brunswick and for the whole province. Thanks.
Minister Carty, do you have an idea of about how many average days the average student has spent at home learning since the pandemic began?
Giving you an average across the province would be unhelpful. I can certainly get you that number because there are some places which have not been affected at all and others that have had multiple days lost. But it again is it's a very low number compared to most places, but very happy to get you the exact numbers in terms of by school and so on, which is probably the best way to look at it because again, an overall number would be way too high for some places and way too low for others.
Minister Laura Brown, CTV.
Ask something that's kind of obvious, I feel like, but have you spoken at all with CUPE directly yet today, and do you plan to, or is there any kind of meeting set up in the coming days?
There aren't any meetings that are set up. I did receive a call from Mr. Dross. I did respond to that call today, but we haven't connected. He left me a voicemail and I left him a voicemail. So, but there aren't any meetings at this point that are scheduled.
I know you've discussed this before, but between the 2% and 3% differences, can you tell me how much money each? What's the difference between those annually?
Well, I can send that. I don't have the information right here. Let me see. I may and I may not. The CUPE demands that I have is what we had prepared for the increase at over 6 years, and they were rejecting 6 years. Our final offer was then down to 5 years. So we're at 8, or our offer that's on the table now is 8.5% over 5 years, which would be in the order of 65 million. What they had asked for was a 20%, which was in the order of 158 million. Annually, both cases annually. They are currently in around 12%. So probably their number, and I would get exact numbers, but we're in the range of probably 100 million compared annually to ours, which is about 65 million in that sense.
Thank you. Michael McDonald, Canadian Press. Yannick Godin, Radio-Canada. Aidan Cox, CBC. John Chillibeck, Brunswick News. Derek Haggett, Brunswick News.
Hi, my questions for Education Minister Dominic Cardy. Mr. Cardy, there's a football game tomorrow between Riverview High and Kennebecasis Valley in Riverview. The coach of the Riverview High sent out a plea to the community for porta potties and a large tent as a makeshift locker room for the visitors. Are you aware that there might be players from KB tomorrow that will be changing in a tent next to high school?
Hey, thank you for that question. We did have a couple of emails on it. So let me just go through a couple of things that are important there for sports in the circuit breaker areas. So any sports and activities not occurring in schools can continue. They're permitted. No intention of canceling that game. Because we're not going to have any custodians to do the in-school cleaning, the buildings are going to be limited in their access, as I mentioned in my remarks earlier. So that's not going to include washrooms or changing rooms. So the teams will not be able to use those facilities. So typically the bathrooms aren't used during a game, and the staff actually expressed a bit of surprise about that request being made, because apparently that's not usually how things work. So what we're going to be requesting is that players come changed, ready to play, and we're not going to be providing tents because that sets up another indoor environment with all the issues that go along with that during COVID. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Derek, did you have a follow-up?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Maude Montembeau, Radio-Canada.
Oui, bonjour.
Yes, a first question for Mr. Cardy. So listen, we talked to many parents, and today, no parents were displeased because of the strike, and it seems that they don't understand why the government doesn't give in to those wage increases. And because of the virtual school, parents will be more angry. Yes, I'm going to answer your two questions. Well, first off, I think that the offer made by the government to SCFP to CUPE was very reasonable. So it offers a pension that wasn't available to them before. And now this offer is on the table. And also this wage increase, and it's quite significant compared to other increases in the private sector in previous years. And also, as the Premier already indicated, there are other unions that receive the same offers. And finally, they agreed to this offer. So it's not something that's extraordinary to what's happening here. The only exception that CUPE decided to shut down schools provincially. So regarding parents' frustration, well, I understand, because now people are very anxious because of the pandemic. Tensions are running high. No one wants this. But at the same time, we want to guarantee as a government that we're doing all we can to manage our public finances to make sure that we have money to invest in our healthcare, to go through this difficult period with the pandemic, and that we have the money to invest in the infrastructure that's needed to make sure that schools will remain open in the years to come. So yes, it's always a balance, but this offer was accepted by other labor groups and other unions. So we're providing pensions to a group that never had access to pensions before. So today it's important to specify that it's a choice to start this strike to impact the education system and to impact our healthcare system with thousands of people. They have children and they work in this sector, and now they need to decide between going to work or take care of their children at home. They need to find people to babysit their children while they need to go to work. So all those individual choices are imposed because of one choice only, the CUPE leadership choice to strike today, and this goes against the education system and against the people in this province. I also have a question for the Premier. So Mr. Higgs, what do you answer to parents and to New Brunswickers who think that you are too stubborn?
Let's just say I'm committed to the future of the province. I'm not committed to my time in office. I'm committed to the future of our province. And every decision that we make as a team is based on the longevity of how we build a province that's successful, not only financially, but it's successful in our ability to keep people here, to bring people here, to see a healthcare system that improves. You know, if you think about the challenges we're facing here and you look across the country and you see challenges of every province is facing. I think in Ontario, they're saying they need 300,000 people to work, and in Quebec and what they're doing, but all across the province. And then you think, okay, what's going to make the biggest difference in order for us to manage going forward and provide the services that we must? Is it to say, well, I'll spend whatever money is necessary to our wage settlement to continue to do the very same thing we've already done? Or is it to say, look, help me do different things, and in that process, you know, we can find different ways and to pay different salaries. But we can't keep doing the same thing and expect just to pay more for it. We have to be innovative if our province is going to succeed in a world that is becoming increasingly more competitive. So I am committed to being part of that change for the future. And yes, there are rough patches that we're going through, and change is difficult. And I am asking parents to look at the future of their kids that may be impacted right now, but at the end of the day, they want a province that they will stay and work here because the province has a future. And it wasn't thrown away because of a political decision. It was reinforced and it was enhanced by the ability to stay the course and do what's right for all taxpayers.
Here, John Chillebeck, Brunswick News.
Hi there, can you guys hear me?
Yes, John, we can hear you.
Great. I'm a little confused about something that the Premier had just said. He mentioned the difference between what's on the table, and essentially, you know, with 65 million versus 100 million, that's 35 million difference a year annually. On a budget the size of New Brunswick, which I think is over 8 billion a year, that doesn't seem all that big. And I'm wondering, you had mentioned that you traded messages today with Stephen Drost. Why don't you two get together and solve this? It doesn't sound like you're all that far apart.
So it's interesting, you know, when we look at a budget during COVID and during the many, numbers and dollars that we received from the federal government, and I think 2.3 billion went out from the federal government, went directly out into the province. We've seen changes in our numbers based on HST returns coming from the federal government, which because of again, through changes in expenditures and activities during COVID and more people unserved and more people building at home and all that stuff, we saw HST increases. But all this stuff is very volatile. And while it's easy to say, oh, well, what's another 40 million a year? Which would amount to, you know, another 160, 200 million over the life of a contract. A contract, by the way, that we will spend about $3 million or $3,500 to every employee of CUPE in retroactivity once the contract's signed. So quite a significant Christmas bonus, I guess, in one sense, although you can't necessarily call it a bonus, but it's retroactive pay. You can't take the approach that what's another 40, what's another 100, what's another 160, what's another 200, because you put that in perspective, like our current numbers in a deficit in a surplus, it's like 3-4% of our budget. That's where it is of our total budget. So it's very volatile. It can move around a lot. You have to look at every decision and get value out of it. So if we're going to create more value in our system, let's look at how we do things differently. And if I thought for a moment we could have that meaningful conversation with the CUPE leadership in how we do things differently in real terms, how we have fair wages that are comparable. And I've said, let's compare with the other private sectors. Let's compare with the other provinces. Let's look at the total package, which amount to not only pensions, but sick time, to the vacations. Let's look at the whole thing and say, wow, how does this compare with other options? So to suggest that, oh, well, it's just 200 million. John, I must say that if we did that on every decision, we wouldn't be in a position we're in right now coming out of the pandemic, and we wouldn't be the envy of Canada looking at a province that's springing back faster than any other province. And even with this little COVID blip that we have, which is now, you know, on the positive track, moving out of it, we need to keep this momentum, and we can't lose sight of the bigger objective. And with Mr. Dross, I did respond. I anticipate that he'll call me back. But you know, I really think the stumbling block is pensions. CUPE National does not want anything to do with a shared risk pension that has proven to be successful, has proven to be fair to all employees and taxpayers, has proven to survive the COVID, the worst pandemic in the world, and still continue to pay out, still be secure. But they will not discuss it, not only to provide it for the members that don't even have a pension, as the minister referenced in his talk, but to recognize that pensions for two of their locals, the others all have the program and their pensions are just fine, but two locals do not, and we currently pay $7 million a year to keep those pensions afloat. 5.7 million of which we will put into a new pension for those that don't have a pension. And they won't even talk about it. Don't even want to talk about it. And you know why, John? Because it's nationally driven. It's not about New Brunswick. It's not about doing what's right for this province. It's about a national CUPE leadership that is driven not for the best interests of our province, but the best interests of what they may see as their union movement.
Thanks, Premier. John, do you have one final question?
Yes. You mentioned earlier that that you had to compare the wages of these CUPE members with workers in the private sector, and that when you look, especially at the lower end wage earners, that they're making far more than their equivalents in the private sector in New Brunswick. When I put this to Roger Melanson, the Liberal opposition leader, he said, well, the private sector wages in New Brunswick are incredibly low. And why would the Premier want our lowest paid employees to make what they do in the private sector when it's so incredibly low and hard to, make a living off of? How do you respond to that?
So let's understand who pays these wages. And I know that there would be some, and maybe Mr. Melanson feels that adding more taxes to the taxpayers around the province is just a normal thing to do. And he's quite conditioned to that line of thinking. But if I did a comparison of what we're talking about, so a public sector custodian is $20.40 an hour compared to a private sector custodian of $11.75. So you may say, well, $11.75 is too cheap, but 20.4 for an hourly rate, a big difference. You know, you'd think there'd be a middle road there somewhere. Plus, you look at the benefits of a defined benefit pension plan, health, dental, life insurance, 240 accumulated sick days, all on the government taxpayer funded program. That's not the case in the private sector. A public sector nursing unit clerk, $25.41. A private sector nursing unit clerk, $15.53. Again, not even considering all of the other benefits that go with the government employees. Public sector administrative support, $31.63. A private sector, $15.53. So I think it's pretty clear that while one may be too low, one would appear to be certainly over the top. So we're not rolling back wages here. We're saying, you know, and how many times have we heard private sector say we can't compete with government offerings? And the sad part here is that it's taxpayers. Every time we make a decision here, it's somebody else paying for it. And the somebody else is every citizen in this province. So when we want to address issues like this and not bind the province long term, and we have 58,000 employees, 45,000 of which are in the union sector. But when we are paying salaries that aren't not competitive, we're asking taxpayers to pay more than they could otherwise get that same service for. And is that fair? So let's be clear, we're not rolling back salaries. But the current programs are very lucrative. They're very, a recognition that some are lower than others, but it's based on the job classifications. But in respect and comparison, they are well-paid positions.
Thank you, Premier. Thank you, everyone. That concludes today's news conference. Merci tout le monde. Ça c'est conclu notre conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
This concludes today's press conference. Thank you, everyone.